Good morning, Key West. I'm Christopher Lydon again, straight man to the stars, and I hope the reader's friend. What a pleasure this weekend has been. Time is running out. We can see the end, and we've got a lot of work to do. We're not going to talk about the posted topic exactly, but these people can be fascinating on anything. I have three sort of topic sentences I want to be sure we get to, and I'm just going to throw them out right now. One has to do with the fact that we haven't spent enough time on the hostile biography, and there are lots of them. I think, Jay Preety referred yesterday to Lawrence Thompson's poisonous 3 volumes on Robert Frost, from which people are still kind of rehabilitating him. But there are lots of others. I think of the actress Claire Bloom's book on Philip Roth, and I always wonder what in the world would tempt a person to declare war in a book form against Philip Roth. But in any event, there was also Paul Theroux, as a young man, wrote an appreciative sort of hero-worshipping book about V.S. Naipaul. And then when he found one of his own books signed and inscribed to V.S. Naipaul, he found it in a used bookstore that V.S. Naipaul had shed it from his library. He wrote Servidia's Shadow, a scathing piece on V.S. Naipaul in certain ways, an examination of mentorship. But in any event, then along came Patrick French's book on V.S. Naipaul, and it made Paul Theroux's book, it was authorized biography, and it made Paul Theroux look like a love note. So, but it to me just gets at the question of some of the more obscure and personal, maybe neurotic, vengeful, appropriating motives that draw a writer to write about another writer. And I'd love to know what the pros feel about it. Secondly, the more I hear about writers in this group, in this long meeting, I keep thinking, you know, there are other artists out there who are conscious of the tradition, conscious of the craft, conscious of the heroes, but think architects, for example. Architects have their own hierarchies. He was a fraud, he was an undiscovered genius, he was this, he was ruined by drink or whatever. Tenor saxophonists definitely have this sense of a kind of inheritance and a relationship. Center fielders have it. I asked Harold Bloom one time, what's the difference between, say, Wallace Stevens' relationship to Walt Whitman and Johnny Damon's relationship to Mickey Mantle in the New York Yankees center field, or Mickey Mantle's relationship to Joe DiMaggio in that center field? Talk about anxieties of influence. And Harold said, there's no difference at all. But the question is simply, what does it illuminate about writers to think about all these other professions? Plumbers, too, probably, thinking about, you know, oh, Joe Blow down there on 9th Street could really, really, really make that fitting, etc. Or so-and-so couldn't. But I wanted to begin with my touchstone here, Phyllis Rose's observation. She was teasing me the other day after the Iyer, Dyer, and Doty session. She said, what is this? It's all guys. It's all guys talking about guys. And I thought this is a moment to repair some of that, partly because we have 2 dolls, guys and dolls, if we can be loose about the language, writing about other women, one in the form of fiction, one in the form of biography. But Phyllis sort of opened the question, what is this thing about guy writers getting into the lives of other guy writers? I want to know, first of all, from the ladies perhaps, what is involved with ladies, getting involved in the ladies' lives? Then I was struck that Judith Thurman had mentioned that before she wrote about Colette and Isaac Dickinson, you know, it was Gloria Steinem who had said, go for it. We need some stories about these people. Julie Salamon, would you just get us started? I'd love to know 2 things. What are female writers of serious purpose doing in these other women's lives? And then what do you see the guys doing in the big playpen of literary biography?
Well, Christopher, first of all, I'm so excited to be called a doll at this time of the morning after having a lot to drink every single night here. So I guess that's a girl thing.
I wasn't going to call you a girl, okay.
But actually, Brenda and I walked over here this morning, and you and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, and we were talking about how it's just interesting, and it's not meant as a criticism, but an observation, that when the guys talked about, not all, but many, talked about their work, they talked a lot about their own backgrounds and what brought them to this and why they wanted to do it in great detail, all of which is incredibly interesting. But when the women talked about their works, they tend to talk about the work or about the person they're writing about. And I started to think, is this just a coincidence, or is this a male-female attribute? And, I was thinking about it a lot in terms of Wendy Wasserstein, when she wrote her play, there I go again, right? But, but that's sort of been my obsession, and thinking about it in terms of her life, that when she was at Yale Drama School, her plays were dismissed by the powers that be because they were not of interest, because they were not about big issues, they were about domestic issues. And it's sort of like somehow when a man writes about their uncertainties about their manhood, or about facing the world, or their internal angst, it's interesting and psychologically meaningful and can change the world. But when a woman does it, she's being a whiny bitch. And so that's what happens first thing in the morning. So that's what I have to say. You?
Rosalind.
Right. Well, I was thinking about George Sand, and on the wall of her little house in Gargilles in the Creuse Valley in France, there's a sign up there saying "Féministe, républicaine, précurseur." So, feminist, republican, precursor. I mean, it's on the wall, and that's when I was thinking about writing my book. I thought, okay, well, that's the person I need in my life. I think I said the other day that it's often at a time of vulnerability in your own life that you kind of come across someone that's going to help you in a way. And so I think it was the size of her life and the variety of it, the political commitment, the involvement with the politics of the day in France and the Paris Commune and everything. I mean, also herself as a mother and a grandmother. She just did everything, and it was at a time in my life when I felt fairly incapable of doing anything. So I think that's why I probably focused in on George Sand. As people have said, and I agree, the topic tends to come and find you. But I didn't want to write about myself, so I write fiction for that reason. So the topic yesterday about having something hidden in a novel, which you probably don't want people to know. I mean, it's not conscious exactly, but it's sort of I think a fiction writer circles around this thing that was being discussed by Colm and Ed and, Mark. Yesterday, which I found very fascinating, that there's always something, that you don't want to be upfront about. I thought maybe it's being English. I think maybe it's being a woman. Maybe it's being of a certain age. I certainly, when I first came to this country, I couldn't believe the memoirs that people wrote about themselves. So fiction is a sense.
Meaning what?
Well, I mean, there was up front about all the terrible things that, it's okay in America to go on about yourself more than it is in England. Okay? I was brought up not to. So that may have, the roots of fiction may have something there. I also have a question which I want to kind of slide in at this point. George Sand, I admired her more for her life than her fiction, really, because a lot of what she wrote is quite pot-boiling. She did have to make money at it, and she did have to sell, and she was very successful, and some of the things she wrote were a lot better and more interesting in this century than others. But it was the life, I think, and the fact of somebody who broke convention, who went out into the streets of Paris wearing pants at a time when people just didn't do that, who had lovers, who wrote for a living, who was politically involved. All that I found very impressive. And I'm currently writing about another dead French person, but I'm not going to say. Oh. And the same thing comes up.
All well taken. I just want to make a note of two remarks that were mentioned just this morning. One from Brenda Wineapple about the job of recovery